Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. It doesn't happen to just women, it happens to men. And what I'm really talking about is harassment in the workplace. But harassment can escalate into violence. And with me is Caress Kennedy, and we're going to talk about workplace harassment as well as workplace violence. Welcome, Caress.
Thank you.
First of all, let's start with what exactly do you do before we get into talking about harassment.
I work for Allied Barton Security Services. We're the largest domestically owned security provider in the United States, and I run their New York, New Jersey region.
How did you get involved in that?
Well, it's an interesting story because I spent the last 20 years in staffing, and staffing is a very similar business in terms of managing large groups of people. And as it worked out, an acquaintance of mine, somebody I had worked with a number of years ago who was a friend, had joined the company, and she called me and she said, "You have got to meet some of the executives and some of the people in this organization. I think you would love it." I had been with my company, I was president of a company for 10 years, and I had no intentions of leaving. And she said, "Well, just meet a few people." And I fell in love with them and with the company. And 2 or 3 months later, I ended up changing jobs, which at this point in my career, I never thought I would do. But here I am. So
that's great. What are the various kinds of harassment that you can experience in the workplace that really pilfers out into your private life, too?
Well, that's a good question. I think that most people think of workplace violence or harassment as culminating in something very overt. And I think we're conditioned by the news media because we see very violent behavior, and that's sort of what we think of as workplace violence or harassment. But harassment can start in very subtle ways, and it could be as simple as somebody touching you inappropriately, saying something to you that makes you feel that your job might be in jeopardy, or something that might indicate quid pro quo, that if you do something for them, they will do something for you. So there are various types of harassments and various degrees of it, but clearly all of it is bad.
What are the different types of harassment that one can experience, and how do you know when they're subtle and they're not so subtle?
I think there's tangible harassment and intangible harassment. The tangible harassment is when you feel that your job is in jeopardy and that if you do something, you're going to get something in return. Intangible harassment would be something that just makes you feel uncomfortable because it's inappropriate, and it could be somebody speaking to you in a way that is inappropriate, yelling, raising their voice. So there's not some benefit to taking that sort of abuse, but it's usually a person who's not able to control their behavior. But it does still have the same negative effect.
Well, it's interesting because I just finished reading the biography of Steve Jobs.
Yes.
And I mean, like, bully, harassment, anger, tears, he ran the gamut. And what I liked about the book was, okay, it touched on workplace harassment. I wouldn't say violence, but I guess when somebody has a temper, you could say that's violent. But it also gave you clues on behaviors and management and how to finesse your way through such an environment. It's a good, I guess Harvard would probably be using this as...
They're going to build a case around it, I'm sure.
Exactly. But how would you handle somebody who's giving you kind of subtle hints and you're not wanting them?
I think the best advice for anybody that is in that situation is to express yourself. It is very important to let somebody know that what they're doing is not viewed as appropriate by you, and to have the confidence in yourself that you should not have to tolerate that sort of behavior. For us, in our company, we don't tolerate it. We have a zero tolerance policy. We have a lot of employees. We have over 55,000 employees.
Wow.
So clearly, we cannot allow any of that inappropriate behavior, and we counsel our people, and we train all of our employees in what is appropriate behavior and what's not appropriate. And that includes all of our security officers, our management team, our staff. Everybody has to complete the training.
So what exactly, besides the fact that somebody is giving you unwanted solicitation, what other covert ways would somebody harass you?
It could be, just as you mentioned with Steve Jobs, raising your voice so that people become intimidated. It could be putting people under pressure, so much pressure that they feel that they can't perform their jobs because they're so unhappy and so uncomfortable. I think that it's such a broad array of different behaviors. I think that many people think that harassment is always sexual harassment or it's not bad. But there could be a lot of other things in terms of speaking to people inappropriately, raising your voice, intimidating people, calling people names, banging things on your desk, throwing things around. I don't know, you mentioned that they had some examples of that in the book. But most of us that have worked in environments have seen some examples of this. And in fact, as you know, our chairman wrote a book on workplace violence, potentially actually wrote it to assist business owners, law enforcement officers, and organizations in how to deal with this pervasive problem. But over 52% of people have actually observed it or heard of it. So it's something that affects everybody that's in the workforce, and these are people who work outside of the home. So 52%, that's just a tremendous number of people that have had some experience with harassment.
Well, you say speaking up. Sometimes it's a little difficult to speak up, especially if the person is your boss and you, A, need your job or you want your job. How would you finesse it so that they can say, you know, I don't like your behavior? Because I know I'm in real estate, and I had a broker call me up, and she started yelling at me, and she was just going off the wall. And I said, don't talk to me that way. And she said, I'll talk any way I want. And I went click, because I wasn't going to take it. And it was like, and she is known for her nasty attitude to other brokers. So it was like not a wake-up call. I think she was probably shocked
that you had reacted that way.
That's right.
There are various techniques for how to deal with people like that. One of the techniques is to say, instead of saying, stop speaking to me in that manner, I don't like it when you talk to me like that. If you're in a situation with a superior where you are afraid perhaps of some negative impact, it might be saying it a little differently. And another way to say it might be, when you speak to me that way, this is how it makes me feel. So it's not pointing your finger and saying, you stop doing this to me, don't you do that. It's really saying, when you speak to me that way, it makes me feel very upset. And I would really prefer that we can meet each other somewhere in the middle in our conversation so that it's a positive interaction and that there's not a negative outcome.
Do you find that most of the harassment is man on woman or men to men?
Harassment affects everybody, and it takes very different forms. It's not just, I think very often we think of harassment as sexual harassment, as I said earlier, but I think it is much more pervasive, and it can be people can act it out in many different ways. So raising a voice or throwing something could be a man to a man, a woman to a man. It wouldn't really matter. If someone has a temper, they're going to display it. And I think, as your example in the book that you just read, here was somebody who I'm sure was non-denominational. When he raised his voice, he raised it at whomever had displeased him, irrespective of their gender.
So if somebody is raising their voice and you feel threatened, or, you know, it's escalated, they've got a pattern, do you go to your superior? Do you document it? how do you protect yourself?
All good advice, and we counsel people always to escalate it to their superior, to always let somebody else know, and to not try to take it into their own hands. And by notifying the next level up, you're able to at least begin an inquiry. Now, at this time, I think I also need to say that sometimes people could use a claim like that against someone who maybe has not done something. So it's the obligation of the organization to really do an investigation and understand what did transpire. Was this person really doing what they've been accused of? Because that's a terrible stain to have on your reputation and your career, especially if you haven't done anything. But first step is always notify your superior so that it can be documented, it can be investigated, and then action can be taken.
A lot of statistics that show that this is common, and you just said 52%. What other statistics? I mean, is it certain age groups? Is it certain ethnic groups, certain educational groups, or is it across the board?
That's a great question. I think that there are some common myths about harassment and about workplace violence. And what we've discovered is that it really is pervasive and across the board. Very often people think of it as blue collar, that it's going to happen in a blue collar situation. That is not correct. It really happens across the board, from professionals to factory workers. It's a problem that does exist when people interact with each other, and there are not some basic ground rules in organizations. So I guess the key point I'd like to make is that every organization, if it wants to be productive today, has got to have some rules around harassment and around workplace violence, because it absolutely affects worker productivity. And if you're a CEO or an executive, you need to be thinking about that, because it's going to ruin your productivity. It could eventually it can destroy your company. You've seen cases where that's happened.
It's actually happened. They've tried to document it. And the upper level, your first command, negates it. Do you go to the level above that person to make sure that, it is pervasive, it's happening over and over again? Because, sometimes, especially if you're a woman and you're young and you're beautiful, people are going to say, oh, they'll fluff it off, or they'll ignore it, or you're imagining things. How high up would you suggest taking it, or do you put a claim in?
I think that each person has to deal with it in their own way. If you're working for an organization that is not going to hear you and is going to minimize your concerns, and if you're experiencing a situation which makes you uncomfortable and where you feel threatened, if you escalate it and people don't respond, if you're strong, you'll find another organization to work for that won't tolerate that. Regarding a claim, I think that's probably an individual thing, and I guess it would depend on what damage you thought had been done to you. And there's a very big body of history out there in case studies and work around these sorts of incidents. But you're asking a personal question. I think as I look historically back, clearly in the 70s, there was a tremendous amount of harassment going on, and a lot of women had to tolerate it. Being called honey, sweetie, innuendos about your gender, if you were an attractive woman, always having comments made, having your bosses book business trips and scheduling late dinners with you. Those are sorts of things that happened. I think they were much more prevalent then. I think today there's much more awareness and much more litigation. It's much more public as a problem today. And I think because of that, people can feel more comfortable in articulating their concerns when something like that does happen. So my own personal feeling is that, yes, somebody does have to speak out to protect themselves, and you should never suffer silently and do anything that someone forces you to, or feel that you have to be forced into something.
You just reminded me of something in the 80s. I used to work with this man who would always call me honey and sweetie. and it would drive me crazy. And I would always call him back, honey and sweetie. And I would say something to my boss, and she says, oh, get over it. Don't worry about it. Forget about it. You're being too sensitive. And one day, I was just so annoyed. I said to him, you know, my name is Barrie. He says, oh, I thought you liked it. I said, no, I found it very degrading. And he never called me anything but Barrie after that.
Well, so here I have a question for you. Did he change your position within the organization? Did they punish you?
No.
They didn't. And
No.
you know why? Because you were probably a great worker, a great contributor, and they realized that they were speaking inappropriately to you, or he was speaking inappropriately to you, so he didn't do anything. And I think for the most part, today, there's so much more awareness. I think people don't have to be afraid to speak out, because most companies are very conscious about it.
Well, that's why I can't watch the television show Mad Men. I cannot watch that show at all. It drives me crazy.
It brings you back, right?
Yes.
Well, no, that was quite a bit further back, but then you're...
Well, moving very fast forward here, emails. You can be harassed by emails.
Yes.
And that, to me, just blows my mind, because you're leaving a paper trail.
And emails are a legal document, and they can be used in court.
Ah,
So
okay.
if, you know, and I think that it's a whole new world order right now, and hand in hand with the incredible benefit that Steve Jobs brought to the world, which is just this ability to be in touch with the planet. It's a double-edged sword, and I think Jobs is a genius, and unfortunately, his tool is used by people who have, you know, other thoughts, and they're not good thoughts.
A couple things happened to me. Specifically today, I got my credit card bill, and there was a charge in there. Well, it was $1.28. It wasn't so much the $1.28 charge. It was a charge that I didn't recognize. So I called the company. They said, we don't recognize this. Somebody's scamming you. So I called the credit card company, and they're putting a stop on that number, which is annoying because everything charges into that number, and sending me out a new one. So this is kind of like harassment, as far as I'm concerned, besides identity theft. So is there any way you can protect yourself on that?
I think the answer is that it's so prevalent that companies now immediately erase those charges from your card, so you know that other than giving them some documentation about it and proving that you didn't have those expenditures, you have no financial obligation for it, and they'll issue you a new card. But I think to answer your question about how prevalent it is and what can you do about it, I think you have to be very careful about leaving your card, keeping your personal possessions close to you, not using your card in a place where you feel it might be seen by somebody who is not ethical, and realizing that once you hand your card over, that they can make a copy of your card, and that for some period of time that card number will probably be used, and there are people who just sell those numbers. It's a whole industry. It is. It's an industry, and there's a shelf life for stolen cards, stolen card numbers. And they can get your card number not only from your using it, but from using it on the telephone, overhearing you using your numbers. There are just so many various ways for people who are looking, who want to take advantage of other people and looking to take your money. So you have to be very careful about that. Also, I think there are a lot of companies that now have added a lot of extra security on the internet, so that when people do shop on the internet, they can feel that their shopping is secure. So I think there are some precautions, but clearly this new world has opened up a lot of ways for people to take advantage of people.
Well, talking about the new world, what happens, you know, if your identity on the internet is stolen? Let's say I have an account with Gmail. Well, I have a Gmail account, and I have an AT&T account, and I have a lot of other accounts. Somebody takes my email and I'm trying to fix my email. And they keep getting the emails. I change my password, but they get the email. Is that harassment, and what can you do?
Well, it's harassment in that, of course it's harassing you because it's driving you crazy, but it's harassment because it's taking something that is yours and using it in a very negative way that's detrimental to you.
Is there any recourse? Because let's say you can't get back into AT&T or to Google to change your email or to change your password or even to contact them. Is there any way you can do something like this?
I think each of the large companies like Google, Yahoo have protocols that you need to follow within those organizations. Mm-hmm. They have whole departments set up to help people that are their users that have had that problem. I'm sure you've heard of the scam where people they hack into your email and then they send notices that you're I had this happen to me a few years ago. They sent emails to all of my friends indicating that I was traveling in Europe and I had lost all of my pocketbook and my money, and please send $600 overnight. And one morning I woke up with a call from my dentist saying, Caress, are you in England or are you at home? Because I've got a notice to send you $600 and I'll send it if you need it, you know. But that has happened to me. So I think if it's happening to the common person, that it's probably very prevalent.
I've gotten a lot of those from my friends, and I say, delete. Because right. I just figure it's...
You do have to do that and change your password, and you have to be very careful. And in fact, corporations now, internet security, IT security has become top on their list. How to protect not only their employees, but how to protect their clients' data and how to protect their company data. And you've seen in the news how large organizations with very sophisticated protocols have been hacked and were confidential information and social security numbers of their clients are now available, and it's a problem.
Well, I know, like I said, I sell real estate, so my BlackBerry has got all my contacts and my emails right on my BlackBerry, and we have to change our password every 6 weeks, I think right. It is, to get into the BlackBerry. It locks us out. First of all, it locks us out if we haven't used it for an hour. And then if you do it 10 times and you have the incorrect password, it wipes it clean.
Right.
Petrifying thought.
Right.
And
especially in real estate.
Yes, yeah. So, you know, that's one precaution that they've started to take because somebody did lose their BlackBerry and I guess something happened. But it's just frightening of what you can do.
Well, I do think you have to be careful about that, and I think that passwords have become more complicated now and more sophisticated so that it's not as easy for someone to be able to replicate it. But you also have to use common sense about the kind of information that you would leave in an electronic device.
Well, when you got your database and your whole
That's
contacts,
a problem.
That is.
Right, but some people leave their bank account information on their BlackBerries or on their in their internet devices, and I just think you have to be very careful. If you're leaving your account number and your password, then somebody is going to figure that out.
How can people control workplace violence? What do you look for? What do you do?
I think the first step is being aware of any changes in people's behavior. That would be somebody acting differently than they've normally acted, somebody that has a lot of tardiness or attendance problems who used to be a great person who was always there, somebody who has mood swings, somebody who has outbursts, somebody who acts unusual. Just being aware of it and being able to approach that person and have the company be aware that maybe something is going on in their lives to offer them assistance and help.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people will say, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong. I'm the same. But yet, clearly something is going on.
Correct.
So you then, okay, so you say, I'm here. In the meantime, you might drop a little hint to somebody and say, they're out of sort these days.
Right, and have other people maybe observe also. It's something that everybody has to help solve. It's a problem that everybody needs to participate in. And I think that a lot of people feel with workplace violence, it will never happen to us. It'll never happen here. Or it'll never happen to me. I'm lucky. That's one of the common myths. It only happens in companies that are a factory environment. It only happens to people who are blue-collar workers, from blue-collar workers, so it wouldn't happen in my office environment. But that's not correct, because workplace violence can come not only internally but externally. It can be a relationship that somebody has outside of work that now comes into the workplace. We see so many instances on college campuses, or even in political arenas now with Gabby. I mean, Gifford. I mean, that was just, you know, horrific. And here was someone that she really would never have seen it coming. So it really can strike at any time. And the best way to prepare for it is to have everybody working towards being observant, everybody thinking about ways that the company and its employees can be protected. And it's more than one person's job, it's everybody's job.
But people don't want to get involved. It's like, oh, I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to get involved. And then the next thing you have is a shooting.
Well, you're right about that, but I also think that it's changing our paradigm a little bit about what is workplace violence, and it's not only the catastrophic events, the big end where somebody does get shot. It's that continuum we talked about, smaller things like the harassment, that if we can stop those as they're happening, then perhaps we can prevent things from escalating to where they get even worse.
Caress, in the closing moments of the show, what would you like to leave the audience with?
I would like to leave the audience with the notion that workplace violence is very prevalent, that it doesn't always have to be a catastrophic event, that there is a continuum, and to be aware of various things along the way on that continuum so that they can be preventive.
Caress, thank you so much for joining me.
It was great meeting you.
Great listening to you and finding out how to prevent workplace violence.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, you can write me or Caress here at the Women's Connection, and we'll be glad to make sure you get an answer. And I hope you never experience workplace violence. Bye now.